Go play. Throughout the history of console game design, there have been various hardware revisions of various consoles, prototypes, even through the retail cycle. You have beta units, there's review units that go out that may not be exactly the same as the final product, and the Xbox One is no exception. We happened to get our hands on an Xbox One prototype. Now I know what you're saying. Bran, it just looks like a CDV 8800. Looks like a Laserdisc player. But I can assure you that it is indeed an Xbox One. Just look at the official branding. It's right there on the front. So what's so special and different about this? Well, if you remember, the retail versions of the Xbox One, they all have what you would call a standard-sized optical drive. I'm sure you notice the giant optical drive that's on the front of this one. Well, as it turns out, Microsoft has had high-quality media consumption and game design in mind since the very beginning of making this console. Now, this doesn't happen all that often, but with this prototype console, we even got a prototype game. What game is it? It's Oblivion. See? Oblivion. Now, as it turns out, Microsoft has had backwards compatibility in mind since the console's inception as well, because, this originally came out for the Xbox 360, so to see this in an Xbox One form factor is quite awesome, and you can tell it's designed for the Xbox One because it's got that really different packaging. Now, what's the deal here? Why did they scrap this design? Well, I can see a number of reasons. The biggest one being a packaging redesign compared to something, say, kind of like this. This is how an Xbox One game, the boxes are about the same. I mean, you can put your shelves in a form factor for Blu-rays, and you can store your Xbox One games, whereas with something like this, you'd have to totally redesign the shelves. Not just consumers, but retailers as well. But that can get pretty expensive. Plus, if you order them online, you'd have to put this in one of those media mailboxes, and it just gets ridiculous. Yeah, shipping something like this is pretty expensive. So what's the idea behind this giant disc? Well, the idea was that Microsoft had 4K gaming in mind from the inception of the Xbox One. You've seen that Xbox One X, it can finally deliver 4K gaming, but this prototype can deliver the same thing. But we needed a way to store those giant textures on a disc because the internet speeds back then were a little slower on average than they are now. Not by much, but it did make a difference. Cable internet is pretty much everywhere, at least in the US now. And the EU has great broadband speeds. So, the idea behind this giant disc is so they can cram all those 4K size textures onto this disc. It's nice because you don't have to go downloading on the internet, and you also don't have to install it to a hard drive because it's all right there on the disc. So you can use the hard drive for downloads, should you choose to, or maybe you got a game that has a massive save file. Let us compare this to what an average Xbox One X game is on, a standard Blu-ray disc. This is the size of the average game today, here is your Xbox One prototype game. You will indeed notice that that disc is about 4 times smaller than this one. And as a result, this one can handle those giant 4K textures. But as 4K TVs started becoming popular, our internet speeds started getting better, and it became a more realistic expectation and aspect of society to indeed get reasonable download speeds for those. So this, fortunately, went by the wayside. And good riddance, because I don't like storing a lot of these. It's about like vinyl. It weighs a little bit more, so you move less of them at a time. It's ridiculous. But anyway, let's go over to the hardware so you can get a closer look at what everything does. Alright, so here is the unit itself. And let me give you a basic hardware panel tour, starting from the left here. This is the master power button. That's what you press for, turning it on. This is a separate microphone headphone level, so you could run a wired headset. This was before they designed the controller and put the headset port in the controller itself. Way better design choice, by the way, than having a wire go across here. Or it could have been Bluetooth or wireless, but here's your separate knob for your headphone level. And this is the IR sensor. They moved those to the back for the retail version of the Xbox One and offer a separate port now for the One S and the One X. This here with the barcode, this was designed to compete with Nintendo's Amiibo technology, but Microsoft realized that Nintendo pretty much owned the concept of scanning in a physical object or a statue with near-field communications. It was a little bit too close to them, so they instead chose to do barcodes. Just in case your game came with any DLC, you could scan in your barcodes and unlock the DLC. But for the retail version, they switched to product keys because they have been doing product keys for a long time. So, key lock for, security purposes. These early units had a display. Your retail version does not have a display. None of them did. But you change how the display looks with that button labeled display right there. This still/step, these buttons here have been designed for frame-by-frame skipping on your media, so that you can do a frame-by-frame. This is a chapter skip, and we have an open and close/stop for loading discs. We also have pause, play, and the cool thing is, they decided to call back to the mid to late 90s with this dial used for rewind and fast forwarding. I think that's pretty cool, but they have gotten rid of all these buttons here in favor of software playback controls to modernize the console. Now, I'm not going to go through and pull out the back, because this is a obnoxious and heavy unit, but it does have HDMI, it has component, it has optical coaxial surround sound, and it does have a composite out, so you can hook it up to older TVs. They decided to get rid of all manners of analog hookups, so that would mean your component and composite cables are now gone for the retail version, but they kept the optical and coaxial. Wait a minute, no, there is no coaxial surround sound. So they kept the optical surround sound. And you can also have your surround sound through HDMI, which you should probably do. So it's just one cable. So, let me plug it in, and we'll fire up the beast and put Oblivion in it. Okay, so it's in standby now. Just push the power button. This was before they had a boot splash and a sound or whatever, so you just get to hear everything spin up. No hard drive in this particular one, because it's a prototype. But we're okay because all the game data is stored on the disk. So, I am going to go ahead and open up the tray. There's that. As you can see, it's quite big. So as you can imagine, the game disc takes up the entire outer ring of the tray. So it's out. We put it in, goes back in. And you can hear its clunky loading mechanism. And we have LD on the display, which means it stands for loaded disk. So let's go ahead and capture some footage. Yeah, this is running pretty smooth. Nice 60 frames a second. Got a good up-res going on. The textures look way better than I remember them, so they obviously did some work there to take advantage of the space. Runs smooth, and it's actually quieter. You remember how loud those first retail Xbox Ones were? They were pretty loud. That prototype's actually a little quieter than what's going on right now. I mean, you can hear a pin drop in here, it's so quiet.
One of the afternoon watch and all's well. I hope I see you well, sir.
Bernardo and Moro Rufus, they don't get along. I don't understand it. I just make the armor and keep it in good shape.
So why did they scrap this design? Well, we already went over that, but I mean, for the most part, I think they did a pretty good job with the redesign and the timing of the release to where, yeah, it came out maybe just a little bit before 4K gaming took off, but they intentionally diminished the playback resolution of the very first generation just so they could provide a great gameplay experience, which having a good experience, if you ask me, is a better option than having a worse experience but with more pixels. It's weird.